this calm demeanor is sort of fake this morning. You can continue to pray for us here. We rent our building, and we have had severe internet problems now for nearly 3 months. Last Sunday we came here and there was no internet at all, so we had to use my Verizon Wi-Fi card to try to stream one of the hours, and then we had to take things home and upload it. That's why there was a delay. This week we got here again and there was no internet. We made a few phone calls, sent some texts, and it appears that the internet is up and running now. On a usual Sunday, Brian, what's it take to upload Steve's sermon from first hour? 15, 20 minutes? 13 to 15 minutes. And today, the Delaware County is hooked up to a new fiber optic line. The upload of Steve's sermon took 51 seconds, as opposed to about 15 minutes. So hopefully this will continue, although we can't seem to access our live stream account, and that might be the way they have their firewall configured here. So we'll work that out. So just pray that our internet holds true and that we can stream this. I'm going to do an interview with Brian Schrager probably, and Brian, if you're listening, it's going to be about 30 minutes at least till I get around to you. The Heim Report, a little bit about what's going on there and some things going on in Israel, and he's going to also give us a little bit of a report on his attendance at the Christ at the Checkpoint conference. So we'll be doing that, and today it's just we're going to talk about, I didn't know what to call it other than multi-level warfare. There is a war going on many, many levels in the world. In the United States, we have a cultural war. We have a political war. We have, because of the president's policies, we have economic and trade wars. Everywhere you look, people are talking about wars. So this is part of this convergence of events. Warfare is converging on many levels as we speak. Everybody sees that this is a problem. Let's just look at a few things. This is a report I saw on CNBC this morning. A major factor behind the U.S.-China trade war is winning at a $12 trillion technology, 5G. And that's part of what's going on in this battle between China and the United States. And China has had a propensity to take our intellectual property and use it for their own benefit without compensating people for it. And they're using it. They're some of the leaders in the development of artificial intelligence. I mentioned a number of weeks ago that they are using face scanning technology to pick up people and arrest them. They use scanning technology on roads. They don't even need the license plate on your car because all of your cars have a signature appearance. If, like mine, I park my little car in the parking garage next to these big SUVs, and I have dents that can't be made by another small car. They can only be made by big SUVs. But that gives my car a particular signature that can be used. I thought this was a great graphic on the front of the new Fortune magazine on artificial intelligence, including the battle for control in China that's taking place. And you see how it's sort of painting the world with the Chinese flag. And that's what China really wants. You have to understand that that's what they want. And they're very powerful. They're 1.4 billion people, but only about 300 million of those people actually participate at any significant level in their economy. 1.1 billion of the Chinese are in abject poverty, some of the worst poverty on the planet. That causes them a lot of internal problems that they try to, for lack of a better term, they try to paint over. So let's look at some of the things going on in the world today and pray about this. This is this rescue operation that's underway in Thailand. My understanding is that they brought out 6 of the boys this morning through this passageway, which is very narrow. You can see that it's several hundred feet or several thousand feet that they couldn't drill down to them. It would take a long, long time to drill down to them. They were losing oxygen in the place where they were. They brought oxygen tanks in. It's a huge, it's a phenomenal operation Lots of countries participating in that. I think even Israel has sent some people over to help. And so this morning, they started, and they were able to get 6 boys out. Now, I understand that they're going to suspend it for 10 hours because of darkness and resume operations in the morning in Thailand to bring out the other, I think it's 6 boys and their coach. This is kind of a good graphic for, I think I got this at the Daily Mail. And this is, you can see how there's these choke points and passageways. And these are young boys, you know, 10, 11, 12 years old that have to learn how to scuba dive. And scuba diving is dangerous even for experienced divers. There was an experienced diver who ran out of air in the passageway and drowned the other day. And he was the equivalent of a Navy SEAL in the Thai Navy. So pray that this goes. You know, there's a lot that could be said about this, about the rescue operation that's underway, and the fact that there are narrow passages that these young boys have to get through to get to safety. There's a lot of biblical analogies that you can talk about. You can talk about the Exodus and how, now I am of the view that the Exodus, the Red Sea that was crossed, was not over on the western side of the Sinai Peninsula. It was on the eastern side, and where they crossed was a very narrow passageway. And I also hold to the view that this Jabal Allah's mountain in Saudi Arabia is the biblical Mount Sinai. And there's some good, I think, increasingly good archaeological evidence for that. Again, it's not an issue that Christian brothers should divide over, but my understanding is there's some very exciting things that are going to be coming out in the very near future that will support that section of Saudi Arabia today, Midian, as where the biblical Mount Sinai is located, at this mountain, Jabal Allah's. And this is in that area where Saudi Arabia is putting, by the way, that Neom, that new city that they're building there that will have connection between Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt there across the Red Sea. And so I think that's where, and the crossing took place where they actually crossed. It's very narrow passageways, very similar to what you would go through when you go into Petra, that narrow passageway that a lot of you are familiar with. So, but there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of biblical analogies that you can take away from this rescue of these young boys. They have one way to get out. They have one way to be saved. I think you understand the biblical analogies. So right now we have this debate. This is a good editorial that I found. There's an empty Supreme Court seat, but there are also a lot of other empty seats. So I took that and I made up a little graphic to show you what I think is at stake. Of course, it is the Supreme Court justice seat, and if each of those high chairs represented 1 million aborted babies, 1 million aborted babies. I started to make it up even a little bit more detail, but it quickly became so where it wasn't very, it didn't do a good graphic, but that's 60 million children. This is really what's at stake. In the Wall Street Journal the other day, William McGurn, who is a lawyer, he served in some of the administrations, he wrote an editorial in the Wall Street Journal, Abortion, Roe, and Trump. And he made, I think, a couple of good points about this debate about Roe versus Wade, which is now 45 plus years since it was decided in January 1973. Mr. McGurn says this: whenever a Supreme Court seat opens up during a Republican administration, headlines start warning that American women will soon be in a new dark ages if Roe versus Wade, the landmark 1973 decision legalizing abortion across all 50 states, is overturned. Unfortunately, what ought to occasion a healthy debate over a contentious issue once again looks to be clouded by a handful of dubious orthodoxies. In rough order, they are as follows. First, that Roe is the settled law of the land. Second, that litmus tests are bad and unhelpful. Finally, that an individual's stand on abortion determines where he stands on Roe. Start with settled law. Now listen, I went to law school. I started law school 3 4 years after Roe was decided. In constitutional law, I took it in early 1978, the 1978 semester, spring semester. And that was one of the main issues, one of the main decisions that we talked about, because it had had such a significant impact on constitutional law. And it was not settled law. And even my left-leaning constitutional law professor believed that it was not a very good decision. That is a widely held position, but it has become political. Now listen, if Roe is overturned, in fact, one of the things, this is another editorial in there, Trump blows away a penumbra. This was by Dan Henninger in Thursday or Friday's Wall Street Journal. And what a penumbra is, if you don't know, if you don't remember 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade science, depending on where you went, you would, some schools got to it a little sooner. Penumbra is shadows. That's what the Roe decision said. We found this right to privacy in the shadows of the Constitution. It wasn't in the real language of the Constitution. It was just in the shadows that might be cast by the Constitution. And sometimes, this is a joke in my golf group, in the early days of spring in Ohio, when you play golf, one of the things that you have to adjust to is a shadow. Because you don't have a shadow in the winter in Ohio, by and large. Why? Because the sun doesn't shine in the winter in Ohio and Columbus. Well, pretty much all of Ohio. So you have to adjust to this shadow, and I'm always complaining about it. And the guy said, well, we have shadows too. And I said, yeah, but it's really dark in the middle of my shadow compared to your shadow. Do the math on that and figure it out. But that's what this decision is talking about, is that the shadows of the Constitution. And then there's also this belief that there's this, I'm losing my, I cannot find my mouse here. Is it on the other screen? Oh, there it is. Thank you. So, for example, Chuck Schumer will get up there and say, oh, this is settled law. This is settled law. We can't overturn settled law. Everybody in America wants this law. The majority want it. And then what's the next statement out of his mouth? When Roe versus Wade is overturned, at least 20 states will automatically outlaw abortion. Well, if 20 states will do that, that's at least 40% of the country that doesn't agree with it, that doesn't think that it's good law. So Chuck Schumer is, for lack of a better term, he is incoherent when he makes these arguments. It's an emotional argument with him. So, look, abortion won't be outlawed. It'll still be the law in many states. But there are some states like Louisiana, I think, and 3 others, they actually have a law put in place that if Roe versus Wade is overturned, abortion is automatically outlawed in their states. So we'll see how it goes. It'll be a huge political issue. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is this warfare, very often, that we see going on in the world is the physical manifestation of a spiritual battle, spiritual warfare going on in the heavenlies. And we know from passages in Daniel 10 and some from Paul in the New Testament that these battles rage. For example, we know the story of Daniel when he fasted and prayed. He prayed for 3 weeks. And finally, the angel came to him and said, listen, I've been fighting the Prince of Persia for 3 weeks to get to you with the answer from the Lord. So these physical battles, or these spiritual battles that take place in the heavenlies, are real, and they are ongoing. Now, we don't see them, but I have no doubt in my mind that those spiritual battles manifest themselves in physical things here on the earth, be it earthquakes, weather, geopolitics. Because Daniel was told, listen, the Prince of Greece is coming. I fought the Prince of Persia, but the Prince of Greece is coming. So there are spiritual entities behind world powers. If it was true at the time of Daniel, it's certainly true today. And as we get closer to the end, it's going to become more and more apparent. I heard a good analogy the other day, and I think it's one that I've used, is that when you are driving down the highway and you're a half a mile from the exit, what's going on at the exit isn't very apparent. When you get to the exit ramp or to the bridge over the interstate, you know exactly what's going on. Why? Because you're closer to what's going on and you can see it much more clearly. It's the same way with Bible prophecy. Some of these prophecies are rather obscure. I think even in our day, they're rather obscure, and that's why I advocate not taking a hugely dogmatic view on them other than a futurist view and a premillennial view, but we're still not quite close enough in many respects to see them exactly. Some of them we can see more clearly, like the rebirth of the nation of Israel. But one of the things going on this week, you may have noticed here in Ohio, it was rather hot this week. How hot was it on July 4th? I didn't play golf on a holiday. That's how hot it was. But this article in the Washington Post talks about, and look at this. This article, originally published Tuesday, was updated Wednesday to add all-time heat records at Mount Washington and to Tbilisi, Georgia, set since Monday. On Thursday, the story was updated to include information on heat-related deaths in Canada and extraordinary heat in Siberia. On Friday, it was updated to add the likely all-time heat record in Africa and Southern California. And it's hot a lot of places. There was a place in Oman, they set the all-time record on Earth for the lowest overnight temperature, 109 degrees. So that's the highest low temperature, for lack of a better term. That's hot. I remember being in Southern California a number of years ago. They set the record that day for the highest temperature in Los Angeles County, 119 degrees ever. It was hot. I remember we stopped by the Walmart. I have to tell this story. Excuse me. I know Pam's going to say, don't tell this story. We stopped by a Walmart, and we thought, we're staying at my in-laws, but they only have one. We don't want to move this fan around all week, so let's buy another fan. So we go to Walmart in Upland, California, and it's like literally the blacktop in the park. It's like 150 degrees in the parking lot. I mean, you have to drink water on the walk from your car to the front door, or you'll dehydrate and die. And so I go up and I want a fan. Where's the fan? And the clerk goes, well, that's a seasonal item. PM, am I lying? She will testify that you can see the hand of testimony back there, that I'm telling you the truth. And PM sort of, she has this, she kind of grabs my arm, which is like, let it go, just shut your trap and let's move on. But I'm like, no, I told her, I said, I can't let this one go. I said, well, it's 150 degrees in the parking lot. What season would you not want a fan other than, well, we sell them in the spring for you. Well, I don't live here, so I'm not going to be here. I said, okay, well, we're going up to the mountains, to some of the national parks. We'd like to get a cooler. Now this is Southern California, the Beach Boys, all this. And what was the answer? That's a seasonal item too. And I'm like, what season is it? Never not the season in Southern California for a cooler. And then I followed my wife's advice and I gave it up. So that's a true story. I just can't figure it out. So everywhere you go, this is a picture of a heat map in Siberia where on the shores of the Arctic Ocean it reached 95 degrees. 40 degrees higher than they've ever recorded this week. Little earthquakes here, disasters here, Denver, all-time temperature record, tied its all-time high temperature record. Mount Washington, New Hampshire, tied its all-time Morris low temperature of 60 degrees. UCLA set its all-time high temperature of 111 degrees on July 6. Other places in Southern California, Montreal recorded its highest temperature in recorded history, 97.9 degrees. And a lot of these places don't have air conditioning. I remember once we were at Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco, it was 95. It was over 100 there. It was 100 there this week. And a lot of places in San Francisco don't have air conditioning. Scotland, Glasgow, had its hottest day on record, hitting 89.4 degrees. Ireland, Northern Ireland, all of them setting records. In India, another thing, not this, but India's worst water crisis in history leaves millions thirsty. India is suffering from its worst water crisis in history, throwing hundreds of millions of lives and jeopardizing economic growth. I talked this last week about Jordan, an article from November in Newsweek magazine that Jordan is feared to be the first country on the planet that could run out of water. I saw an article yesterday, Lake Mead outside of Las Vegas is at its lowest point in history and is only 2 feet from reaching a level at which a mandatory federal controls strike in. The short man out, there's all these agreements about water. I mean, if you want a sure way to practice law and make money at it, be a water rights lawyer in the southwest part of the United States. You'll have plenty of business, and if the droughts continue like they have, it's going to be even bigger idea. And in the conflict over the Colorado River Basin, for lack of a better term, Arizona has been left kind of high and dry in some respects as to what they're going to get out of Lake Mead and elsewhere. And they're worried about development. Can we fill our pools and that type of thing? And it's a serious, and this is going on everywhere you look around the world. And it's not just heat or drought, in some cases, record floods in Japan. I saw this picture on Foreign Policy. This is a picture of the full moon in England, showing fires in front of it. There's all this warfare going on. Something is going on, and I think it's ultimately a spiritual battle. We had a bomb suspect arrested in Cleveland for terrorism. Lebanese tourist was sentenced to 8 years for insulting Egypt in a Facebook video. Why did she? What was her insult? Men were pawing me and trying to rape me. And she posted a video about it on Facebook, and now she's going to prison for 8 years because she insulted Egypt. Romans 1 tells us that eventually people, their reprobate mind, gets to the point where what does it say? They suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And so we should expect to see these things. So let's talk a little bit about, and this is Israel. Number of small quakes. I don't like to, every time there's a 4.1 earthquake, people start posting about it on Facebook. And I've been through a couple 5.0 earthquakes. And, I remember 4.1 earthquake, that's me running down the stairs, okay? That's about what you would feel. It's disconcerting, but it's not totally damaging. But they're happening all over the place, and there's also these reports and concerns in Israel and elsewhere that there are these places. There are faults through there. The Great Rift Valley runs from all the way down through the Jordan Valley, all the way down into Lake Kenya in Africa. And it's one of the major earthquake fault zones of the world. You can stand there. In fact, I don't know if I ever posted it, but Brian Schrager, who we're going to be talking to in just a minute, and I went out, walked around outside of the old city a year ago when we were in Israel, and you can see the fault line right down through the Mount of Olives. Now we know that it says that someday what will happen? The Mount of Olives will split. Well, there's a fault right there. And it'll make a passageway for water to flow from the Temple Mount all the way down and sweeten the waters of the Dead Sea. That's going to be an awesome thing to watch and see, because The Dead Sea's disappearing right now because there's so little water getting to it because everybody's siphoning it off. Now we have the situation in southern Syria, and I'll talk about that. Then we'll talk to Brian. If I have time, I'll do some other things. But the situation in southern Syria on the Golan border with Israel has been developing over the past just 7 or 8 days. And I've also noticed one of the things about news in the world today is that things change very quickly. Like I was preparing things, and as I went back, I had done some slides early in the week, and I went back to them, and I thought, I had to check, and I did them on July 4th, 4 days ago, and it seemed like it was like a month ago that I put these slides together because things had changed so quickly. So what happened in southern Syria, near Dara down here, this is where the Syrian civil war started in March 2011. Russia and Syria started bombing Dara. This is sort of like the last bastion of where people are there. And of course, that red area is the area of the Golan Heights. You see the Sea of Galilee there. Here's another map of the Golan. This is actually, I think, from a CIA map from about 1994. No, I never worked for the CIA, just to make that clear. But it shows this strip of land, which is highly contested. And along that strip to the right there, you see where Syria's kind of split a little bit. There's like a no man's land. And there's been a special forces agreement, or a control of forces agreement between Syria and Israel since 1974 that they won't put forces in there. Now, some Syrian forces did enter there near Kenitra. Kenitra would be located right about here. And a lot of you have stood there at the overlook and looked over to Kenitra. Damascus is up here to the right, upper right. You can, on a clear day, you can sort of see from the upper reaches of the Golan, you can see the suburbs, outer suburbs of Damascus. It's about 35 miles, I think, from there to downtown Damascus. It's really not that far. And then, of course, Mount Hermon is up here, and you have Tel Dan and Caesarea Philippi over in this region right here. So a very compact region, but highly contested, fertile, rich, just like the area down around Darwa is fertile and rich. It's volcanic lava soil, and it has a lot of, and they had a drought there. And Assad started taxing them more. People started forming rebel groups. And there's a whole wide variety. Don't believe these people who say that it's all black and white. They're either ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or they support Assad. There's all kind, it's a very complex interaction. And anybody saying that it's that black and white does not understand what's going on there. So in Assad, that some people loved him, some people didn't like him. He tolerated the Christians, but listen, he has gone into these cities, Sunni cities, and they barrel bombed them and destroyed them to the fact where people have gotten up to move. And so people, when he started bombing them a little over a week ago, people started leaving. And what they did was they left this area of southwest Syria around Dara. This area right here in this corner is still controlled by ISIS. So that area has not been cleaned up yet. That's going to take a little bit longer. But the people, they either went to Jordan to the south, or they went up here to Israel, and they also went up to the Kenitra crossing. And one of the reasons they did that was because that was where they could be safe, because this is a recognized no-fly zone. So they knew that they could go there and not be bombed like they were getting bombed in Dara and other cities in southern Syria. Now Assad, to show you what a good guy he was, he said, listen, if you don't want to stay, I will bus you up here to around Turkey in Idlib, and you can live in the rebel-controlled villages up there. I'll put you on a bus. And there's a highway that goes from just a little bit to the east here of Dara, Nabil, I think is the city, and it goes up here, it goes through Damascus, Goes up through Aleppo all the way to the north. It's called M5. It's a highway. Here's another map of the area. You can see the gray area there along the Golan. That's still controlled by ISIS. The red area is controlled by the Syrian government. Here is just a short report. Well, I'm going to skip this report because I can tell you what it says more quickly than the video will play. There was an agreement reached last fall between the United States, Jordan, and Russia about southern Syria. We're not going to be attacking each other. We're not going to be trying to take it over and that type of thing. And Vladimir Putin actually came to everybody and he said, "Look, what we're going to do is we're not going to do anything in southern Syria. Would everybody please back off while we host the World Cup? Okay, just it's a few weeks. It's still got to go. You know, everybody in England is going crazy because England's in the semifinals for the first time. And it's all European teams now. To show you how little I know about Croatia, England, and two others. And Russia got beat yesterday. Oh, Belgium is another one. And so Putin says, "Look, while I'm doing this, would you just take it easy? We're trying to celebrate the World Cup and all this." And everybody said, "Fine." So what did Putin do? Putin and Assad started bombing everybody in southern Syria, violating his own request. This is why you have to be very, very careful with Russian propaganda. They're very good with it. Sometimes there might be bad people that want to make Assad look bad, and they will do a chemical attack. But I have to tell you, when I hear Russia saying, "Oh, there's a chemical attack coming, there's a chemical attack coming, it's going to be done by bad," it may be being done by them. They're masters at propaganda. Somebody that knew told me there were 2 million people employed to put out propaganda during the days of the old Soviet Union. And there are probably still a lot of them doing it. So you need to understand that, and I'm continually amazed at people that just believe everything that Russia says. There are some YouTube channels that essentially become, my question would be is, how much does Prov to pay you? Because you're just an outlet for Russian propaganda. And it's difficult to know what's going on because the truth is sometimes in the details. And so you see this, there were displaced persons. Remember, the first reports were 50,000, then 60,000, then 160, then 220, 300, then 350,000 people were displaced in these attacks. Press all over the place is like, what's going on? Here was from the Arab News. Is Trump and Putin going to get a great deal going to settle Syria when they meet in a couple weeks? A few days before that, Netanyahu is meeting with them. This paragraph from an editorial in the Arab News, which is a Saudi, and you need to understand, it's a Saudi funded newspaper, so it's going to be biased towards Arab press, but the joint military operation in the lower paragraph there appears to have come about following an understanding between Russia and Israel to allow the deployment of the Syrian army in southern Syria. Jordan and the U.S. may also be part of that understanding, which is based on Russian guarantees to keep pro-Iranian militias out of Syria's 3 southern provinces. Washington had softened its position on the Syrian deployment and informed rebel groups not to count on U.S. intervention or assistance. Israel has said that it will only allow the Syrian army to deploy along the occupied Golan Heights borders. On Monday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was quoted as saying, "We will not allow entry into our territory and will demand the 1974 separation of forces agreement with the Syrian army be strictly upheld." And there's a concern about what's going to happen to these citizens. Now, this was the July 4th Arab News. Now the reports are this morning that they've reached some kind of an agreement. They've negotiated surrenders with some of the rebel groups. They're turning over their weapons, and they're going to be allowed to leave. But the details are very, very hazy. And here's a picture. Here's a map of where everything stands. This is from yesterday's Washington Post. Here's a map. You can see the highway that I was telling you about, this M5 highway that goes all the way up through Syria, all the way up to essentially the Turkish border. And so we have this, the Syrian rebels have surrendered. Big piece in yesterday's Wall Street Journal about Russia's turn to Asia and how there's a thing called the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, with Russia and China, it's sort of the answer to the it used to be G8, and we kicked Russia out. Russia got kicked out, now it's G7. This is front pages this morning about, what's going to happen. What's going to happen? Seth Frantzman, don't have time to go into it. Maybe Brian and I can talk about it in just a minute. He has a great article on the front page of this morning's Jerusalem Post about what does this mean for Israel? What's going to happen? Because it's very murky. We don't know. It appears from many reports that Iranian and Hezbollah troops are wearing Syrian army uniforms, because Israel said nobody that's not Syrian army can come near the border. There are aid organizations that are sending doctors and aid over into Syria to help these refugees. A lot of them are returning home. And it's kind of interesting. A week and a half ago, there were no refugees there. Then it got up to over 300,000, and now they're all heading back home. And that just shows you how quickly things change. But Russia's there. Russia, from as far as I can determine, violated its own request that nobody do anything during the World Cup. Great article. Israel must stop Syria's advance southward at the Begin Sadat Center and Perspectives. This is causing instability in Jordan. I will play you a couple minutes of Dr. Martin Sherman of a Strategic Studies Institute for Strategic Studies in Israel, talking about what's going on with Jordan. Because, Jordan got all this money from Saudi Arabia, and here's what he says.
Hussein, and, Abdallah. And this has huge implications across the region, particularly, say, for the Trump peace plan, because the strategic importance of Judea and Samaria is hugely impacted by the kind of regime that you may have east of it. If Abdallah is deposed and replaced by a more radical regime, or is even sufficiently weakened and will have to obey the demands of more radical elements, this could have huge implications for Israel and the acceptability of any Trump plan which involves territorial concessions.
So what he's saying is, so here we have Jordan. Jordan's very unstable. What happens if something happens to Jordan? Reports from the Begin Sadat Center say that Saudi Arabia is trying to use their money and everything to take control of the Islamic holy sites at the Temple Mount. So there, as I said, there are these little heat, earthquakes, disruptions, and this warfare going on many levels everywhere. So now I want to talk to Brian Schrager, and I'm going to try to do this. So let me get to my browser, and let me go here. Okay. And hopefully this is going to work. For some reason, I'm not getting the sound. Brian, can you hear me? I'm going to have to go to configure my settings here. Hang on a second here. Let me text him. Trying again here. Hi, Brian, are you there? Hello? Well, this is one of the, this is why you don't do these things live necessarily. Well, call failed. I will try one more time and we'll see what happens. This is exciting prophecy update here. And for some reason, I'm not getting... So... Okay, well, for some reason, we're not connecting. So it seemed to be... Last time we did it, we just kind of flew by the seat of our pants. So let me go back here to my presentation, and I'll try to do an interview with Brian this week. There's some, pray for Brian. He's doing some things with regard to the Heim Report and Jerusalem Journal. You may not have seen, if you follow him on Facebook, you may not have seen the daily reminders of the Heim Report with the great pictures and memes that he puts up. He's been trying to reconfigure things. He does need to raise some money. So you can contribute through Jerusalem Journal, Heim Report to that. He may also do some crowdfunding. He has to redo his website and has some other needs that he has. So just watch his Facebook posts and that type of thing for raising the funds, and contribute to him if you think. So, because he's there on the ground and he's doing, I think, great work. I know he was out with Seth Fransman, whose article I just mentioned, and Jonathan Spire, one of the better writers on the Middle East. And so let me see if he's going to try this one more time, because he is calling me. Okay, can you hear me now? For some reason, I'm not getting the audio. Okay. Well, we're going to I'm not sure what's going on. So I'm going to close this down. Brian, I'll call you, and yeah, I think he's listening live. You can try me on Skype if you want. Facebook doesn't seem to be working right at the moment. So, but pray for Brian. Contribute if you think, because there's some things that he's doing, I think, that would be very helpful to him to have, and he's reconfiguring the Heim Report. Needs to be split off from the Jerusalem Journal. He's also reconfiguring that, and he also has some things he wanted to say about Christ at the Checkpoint Conference and some of the things that he learned there. So I'll, unless he calls in on Skype, I would say my thing online, but then I'm afraid everybody else would start calling me. So, what's that? Yes, it is. No, the Wi-Fi is not working, but the hardwired is. And I also have a Wi-Fi card. So here's this article I mentioned. The Saudi religious diplomacy is targeting Jerusalem. The Saudis have been kind of emboldened by Trump's relationship with them, Israel's relationship with them. Here's the executive summary. A United Arab Emirates-backed Saudi effort to wrest control from Jordan of Islam's holy places in Jerusalem signals a sharper, more overt edge to Saudi religious diplomacy. The kingdom's quest for regional hegemony risks deepening divides in the Muslim world. And the article goes on to say that a lot of people oppose what the Saudis are doing. The Iranians don't like it. The Syrians don't like it. The Turks don't like it. And Jordan's kind of stuck in the middle. And we know Jordan, there's references to the area of Jordan in Daniel that talks about that's an area that the Antichrist really won't have control over, right next to Israel. So that's one thing that's going on. Then we had the Pope. He had a meeting here the other day with all these Orthodox bishops at a city in southern Italy. And he says, one of the things he said, one of his quotes, was that walls occupation hamper Middle East peace. And I found this great graphic about the walls around the Vatican City in Rome that the Pope seems to be missing, you know. Maybe he can't see them from his ivory tower, I don't know. He said this, truces maintained by walls and displays of power will not lead to peace, but only the concrete desire to listen and to engage in dialogue will. When does this ever work? You know, it says in the end times the Antichrist will come and he'll be spouting essentially lies. Things that to most people won't make any sense. Well, to believers won't make any sense. And this is the Pope who lives in a walled city. Let there be an end to the few profiting from the sufferings of many. No more occupying territories and thus tearing people apart, he said. He also condemned religious extremism, saying many conflicts in the region had been stoked by forms of fundamentalism and fanaticism that, under the guise of religion, have profaned God's name, which is peace, and persecuted age-old neighbors. Francis also spoke twice about Jerusalem, the holy city whose status is at the heart of a bitter conflict. Israel says it is the country's united and eternal capital, while Palestinians want East Jerusalem as the capital of any future state. Well, now there's a lot going on with regard to Iran. This is one of the container ships run by a French shipping container company. I don't know if any of you have ever been to the port of Los Angeles, the port of Long Beach. There's some ocean between, a little bit of ocean between, and a giant suspension bridge that goes over the inlet of water there. But the containers there, just tens of thousands of containers stacked all over that port. And you wonder how, you know, how does anything get to me? I mean, I remember years ago I ordered a special laptop, and it was made in China, and it was in my hands 3 days later. And I'm like, how does that happen? I mean, to me, that's almost a miracle. And we do this with all sorts of goods all over the world, and they make them through these container ports and rail yards like we have here in Columbus and that type of thing. So this French company has said they're going to stop shipping goods to and from Iran. Now, the EU says, no, everybody's going to continue shipping, but the French companies are saying, no, we don't want to get caught up in U.S. sanctions, because the U.S. still is the biggest economy. So what the President Trump has done is that we're out of the Iran deal. We're going to enact sanctions coming up here pretty shortly. And a lot of companies are saying, well, we're not going to deal with Iran. We're not going to transport their goods. We're not going to ship goods to them. We're not going to transport their oil. It's having an impact. You may have noticed that gasoline prices are up. Iran has responded and said, no, you people, you're attacking us. It's just so awful that you're doing this. This was in the Tehran Times the other day. An Iranian commander said, up in the top, foreign hands might be behind low precipitation in Iran. And what he said was, Israel is stealing our clouds. Now look, I'm always impressed by the IDF and the Mossad and some of the things that they're able to do. Like they took all those documents out of the warehouse in Tehran and got them to Israel, let alone just getting them out of Iran. They got them all the way to Israel to be reviewed. But I don't think Israel's even good enough to steal clouds. That's just my assessment of the situation. But, so the EU has a big meeting this week, and they had Rouhani there. I don't think I have a picture of it. You can find it in the newspapers this morning. And Netanyahu gave a speech on July 4th, and one of the things he talked about was the relationship between the EU and Iran. And this, I think this is pretty good.
And I can tell you that this week, there's going to be a meeting. And the meeting's going to be in Europe, Can you hear me? You got to hear this. Listen to me carefully. There is a meeting this week by the P4 without the United States. They're going to discuss how to go around the decision that President Trump in the United States made to leave this bad deal, which is funding Iran's terrorism and its aggression with billions of dollars. There is, in this same week, something extraordinary. The P4 invited Iran's president, Rouhani, to attend that meeting. But at the same time, in recent days, this same regime dispatched a terror cell to carry out a major terrorist action in France. The commander of this terror cell was an Iranian diplomat in Austria. Fortunately, the plot was exposed. The cell's Iranian members were arrested in France, Belgium, and Germany. France and Germany are part of the P4. At the time of their capture, the cell members had explosives, detonators, and more. European authorities are now completing their investigation and are expected to charge the Iranian agents and cell members behind the plot. This Iranian terror plot was planned on the soil of Europe on the same week that the European leaders are supposed to meet the president of Iran about circumventing the sanctions on Iran. Here's my message to the European leaders. Stop funding the very regime that is sponsoring terrorism against you and against so many others. Stop appeasing Iran.
And he's right. So let me go. If you saw me texting, I was texting with Brian, and we're going to just try to do something midweek here. This is also an important thing in Bible prophecy. Turkey is very important in Bible prophecy. A lot of passages talk about it, Daniel 8. And so it's something to keep an eye on. This is an editorial in the Jerusalem Post the other day, managing an anti-American Turkey. And it's clear that Turkey is doing all these things. Now, there was a big election in Turkey just a couple of weeks ago. Erdogan had a sweeping victory, but everybody was coming out saying, oh, you know, I don't know if he's going to win. It's going to be close. But it turned out it wasn't really all that close. At least, even in a runoff, he would have won. And maybe he stuffed all the ballot boxes. I don't know. But in many parts of Turkey, he's widely popular. He is an Islamist. I saw a source that I usually trust quite a bit saying, Erdogan's not that bad. And I think, yeah, Erdogan is that bad. Here's an example. I mean, just today, as he's getting sworn in, they fired 18,000 personnel out of the government. 9,000 of them were policemen. And there's tens of thousands that he has purged from his government. It's one of the reasons why I think he kind of sidled up to Russia, because when that coup took place about 2 years ago, whether it was fake or not, there was an enormous purge of the military to put his handpicked people in charge that would go along with him. And for a while, that's very destabilizing to your forces. He's threatened to get rid of our air base there in Insular in Turkey, where we have some nuclear weapons. He's done a lot of things that are anti-American, anti-Israel. He blames Israel for everything. He's trying to posture himself in the Islamic world as the great sultan. And he's been given he's essentially the dictator. Even, this is from a Saudi paper, Turkey at a crossroads under all-powerful Erdogan, and it's true. Now, the New York Times, in their editorial, when they talked about the election results, they said, well, they were very encouraged to a point. They said, well, you know, yeah, he's a bad guy and he's a dictator that's been popularly elected and he's going to get even more power. But we're hopeful that things will turn around. And it's sort of this wishful thinking. With regard to the oil, Saudi Arabia has said there's a lot of conflict now. Trump's saying you need to pump more oil. Saudi Arabia is saying no, we're not going to pump more oil, or maybe we won't. Iran, who's part of OPEC, says you can't do this. You can't interfere, Mr. Trump, in OPEC. You're not part of OPEC. And Trump's trying to keep oil and gas prices down to a point. So as I said, there's all these little disruptions and conflicts everywhere about, it seems like, just about everything. It's interesting, and I'll close with this. There was an editorial or a perspective paper at the Begin Sadat Center, New Strategic Dimensions of the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, we know in Bible prophecy that the Middle East, and specifically Israel, is central to a lot of those prophecies and what's going on. And the interesting thing is that there are geopolitical reasons why that's happening. Aside from the spiritual thing, there are things that are happening. Look at what this editorial or this perspective paper says. It says this: the geostrategic, diplomatic, and economic influence of the Eastern Mediterranean is more significant today than ever before. Now, I'm pretty sure this guy doesn't read the Bible prophecies like we read them. And I'm only saying is when you see people, secular people, writing articles like this that fit hand in glove with what the Bible is telling us is coming, is you ought to be looking at this. This creates opportunities for Greece and Cyprus and Israel, and also increases the challenges and perils ahead. For the first time since the collapse of the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Mediterranean is in the midst of a tectonic shift, and not just real physical earthquakes, geopolitical earthquakes. The region represents all the required attributes to function as a distinct sub-regional system in the 21st century's international environment. The Eastern Mediterranean holds the interest of the great powers, US, Russia, and China. It's a critical element on the Silk Road that China is trying to put together. It contains resolute regional actors that influence the socio-political orbit of the region: Israel, Egypt, and Turkey, and Iran, Persia. All of the countries that the Bible says are going to be important in Bible prophecy, this guy's just looking at the facts on the ground and saying, this is unusual. This has not happened before. There are also two ongoing civil wars in the region that offer a venue in which the great powers can sharpen their claws, often by proxy: Syria and Libya. There are two major basins with potential natural gas resources that can play a decisive role in the difficult transition period from oil energy monopoly to alternative energy resources: the Nile Delta Basin and the Levant Basin. And I went and looked up in the Oil and Gas Journal. There's a huge natural gas field off of Egypt. And of course, we know there's the Leviathan field off of Israel. Things that by many estimates would make Israel self-sufficient in natural gas for as long as 500 or 600 years. And with fracking abilities and that type of thing, there's also, I mean, we saw some drilling rigs up in the Golan Heights when we were there a year ago. And they're not hidden or anything. Listen to this. Today, the Eastern Mediterranean has taken on the grim role the Balkans played in the early 20th century. Political and economic volatility affects more or less every state in the region. Now, why does he make the allusion to the Balkans? Where did World War I start? World War I started when the Archduke Ferdinand of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was assassinated in Sarajevo, the Crown Prince, in Yugoslavia, in the Balkans. And I think the guy who's making the next analogy is, this could be where the next great world war starts. I think that's what the Bible says, very clearly. The cycle of violence, either in the form of open civil war or in terms of domestic trouble, seems almost impossible to stop solely through external institutional intervention or pleas deriving from international law. Translation, it looks like a war's coming. Diplomacy is not going to solve this. It looks like we're going to have fighting. Regarding the latter, events in the region prove that in Hobbesian geostrategic conditions, the implementation of international law as the ultimate tool for effective crisis resolution is utterly futile. Translation, maybe it's a war, maybe somebody's going to step on the scene who's going to have the man with the plan, the answer. Do you see where this is going? And this is a secular source. However, not everything in the Eastern Mediterranean deserves to be approached through so Stygian black a shade of analysis. For example, is gradually becoming an IT superpower. The so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution has been hastened on an international level by Israeli companies and academic institutions that are actively researching and manufacturing. And so it goes through, there's a graphic showing the Fourth Industrial Revolution, cyber physical systems, artificial intelligence. And it's coming quickly. It's part of the trade war going on right now between the United States and China. High-tech spring to counter the negative aura of the Arab Spring. Very interesting article, and I think it dovetails very nicely with Bible prophecy. And we talk about the American oil boom. You see how the oil production has gone up in the United States. Now maybe the largest oil producer on the planet. This is causing trouble with China on their Belt and Road, I've said Silk Road, Belt and Road initiative that they're trying. And then here's this one. Now, Turkey doesn't have a lot of natural gas or oil resources. But what does Turkey have that's important in all of these end times things? Geography, location, location, location. It sits on that land bridge between Asia and Europe, and even to some extent Africa. Israel's strategically located for the same reason. That's why when you see those sort of a cloverleaf design, Jerusalem kind of right in the middle, you have Asia, you have Africa, and you have Europe, and this land bridge. And so geopolitically, there's probably a reason why Jesus was right there in Israel, because it was literally the center of the world. All the trade routes of the world passed through there. Not too far from the village where he grew up and where he had his ministry in Capernaum. It was no accident. It's no accident now, but this is just a little video.
Towards what they call a new chapter in energy history. The 1,850-kilometer-long pipeline will provide 6 billion cubic meters of gas to Turkey every year. It runs from Ardahan province in northeastern Turkey to Edirne in the northwest, bordering Greece and Bulgaria. It will also supply 10 billion cubic meters of gas to Europe by 2020.
The TANAP project is going to answer the needs of the market. New projects will be operationalized in the upcoming years, and TANAP will be the harbinger of those projects as well. The numbers speak for themselves. 56-inch pipes and 180,000 kilometers mean that TANAP is the longest natural gas pipeline of Turkey and the Middle East.
And it's not just Turkey and Azerbaijan that benefit.
The whole region will be able to enjoy broad and secure energy prospects. As clearly shown by the last decade, the energy resources have been sporadically abused by Russian Federation. They have become a useful tool for putting pressure on the energy-dependent countries in order to influence their domestic and foreign policies or punish them.
But there's more to it than energy security. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says the project has already created around 20,000 jobs in Turkey. He says this is another step towards becoming an energy hub. Gas imported from Azerbaijan will be cheaper than Russian gas and leaves Turkey with more options. Erdogan says some countries tried to play down and discourage this energy project, but Turkey and its regional allies persisted and the project materialized. He said this is just the beginning. He promises much more is in the pipeline.
Well, that's interesting because this plays into big geopolitics, because who's the main supplier of gas right now to Europe, which is still a huge market, and it's probably always going to be a huge market, is Russia. And a lot of those pipelines come through Ukraine. Now they're getting alternative routes, and Israel is also talking about routes up through Cyprus and Greece into Europe, which will destroy Russians, essentially what it now amounts to, monopoly on gas to Europe. And because it has a monopoly on gas to Europe, it can use that monopoly to exert influence. But now it looks like there are going to be other alternatives to Russian gas. Why does Russia, if Russia's part of Ezekiel 38, why do they come down? I mean, is this all being set up? To me, it seems very clear that there are many, many reasons to believe that's being set up. And it's all happening at the same time that all this other stuff is happening. Terror attacks, heat, floods, earthquakes, volcanic activity. It's really reached a point where it's hard. You have to just sit back and look at it objectively. And I think even secular people who know nothing about Bible prophecy, they do the same thing. They sit back and they go, because I've had them ask me, what's going on? It seems like things are kind of out of control. Well, they're not, because we know that God is in control and He will work out His perfect plan to fulfill all of these prophecies in His time, in His way, and to His glory. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word, for your work. We pray for our friend Brian, that you'll be with him and help him in his raising of funds for Jerusalem Journal and the Heim Report. Pray you'll bless that endeavor. Pray you'll keep his visa issues, resolve any of those as they come up from year to year, so he can continue his work there in Israel. Pray for us this week that you'll be with us, that you'll give us a renewed power and infilling of your Spirit to go out and speak boldly the truth of the Word of God in the Bible, and the fact that there is a coming King, at which time there will be peace on earth. But that the only way that that will happen is through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. In Jesus' name, amen.